Hello, and welcome to the virtual tour for Negro Stories. Negro Stories was inspired by the essential questions that historically we have neglected to ask, answer, and acknowledge as Americans. Questions like, do you remember the very first time that you experienced or witnessed racial discrimination? What about the very first time that you were denied service, access, resources, a job, or even a meal because of your ethnic background, the color of your skin, or the texture of your hair? Or do you recall the very first time that you were called a nigger? These questions are important because they reveal what we have endured, who we are, and who we could potentially become if we are not sincere and mindful about the work ahead. The first piece we'll view is called The Picnic. This piece was created in recognition of the 6,500 men, women, and children that were lynched between 1877 and 1959. This is the period in American history referred to as Reconstruction. It is common knowledge also that these lynchings were viewed as entertainment or an outing of sorts, and it was not uncommon for parents to gather children, pack an afternoon lunch and a blanket, and gather to view the lynchings. The next image is called Nickname. This piece is inspired by my very own Negro story. It references an experience that I had as a 5-year-old. One day after school, I recall sharing some exciting news with my mother over an afternoon snack. I told her that not only did I make a new friend that day, but I also earned a new nickname. My mother looked at me and asked me, "Really? What is your new nickname?" I then replied and smiled broadly while sharing that my new friend, Andy, told me that my nickname was special and just for me, and that I would be called Nigger. Now you can imagine my mother's response, especially since she, at the tender age of 5, integrated Caddo Parish in our home state of Louisiana in the 60s. You can also imagine the parent-teacher conference that followed. The next image is called Ballet Blanc. This term is used to refer to all things traditional and celebrated in connection with the beautiful art form of ballet. Ballet Blanc refers to the form, the dress, the culture of ballet. And in this case, the preferred body type. A few months ago, while conducting research for this very exhibition, I was having a conversation with a dear friend, and we were talking about family and shared history and personal experiences. And some way or the other, we began talking about what we wanted to be when we were children. She shared with me that when she was younger, she wanted to be a dancer, and that it was a desire of her heart to be a prima ballerina. She then shared her Negro story. She remembered that afternoon her teacher came into the classroom and happily asked all the students to stand and to share what they wanted to be when they grew up. And one by one, the students exclaimed, "A teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, a painter." My friend said, "I want to be a prima ballerina." Her teacher quickly dismissed her contribution and said, "You'll have to pick again, because you'll never be a prima ballerina, my dear. You simply don't have the body type." My friend was 4. And while she was not fully aware of what it meant, or even what a body type was, she could tell by her teacher's expression that this was not the path for her. The next piece is called The Birthday Party. Birthday parties are a beautiful, celebrated rite of passage for American children of all backgrounds. Imagine that you are a little girl that has been invited to your very first birthday party. You have a brand new dress and shoes, and your mother even provided a brand new piece of pink ribbon for your hair. You have a small gift in your right hand, and your left hand is holding the hand of your mother. As you walk towards the door, your broad, beautiful smile is quickly replaced with a look of astonishment. You see, once the door has opened, it is revealed that there has been a miscommunication of sorts, that the afternoon birthday party you thought you were invited to does not exist. All of your fellow classmates on the opposite side of the door, standing in the living room, are in their pajamas. And after a brief conversation between your mother and one of the organizing mothers, it is apparent that there was a bit of an error made. You see, you were originally invited to the party, but when the theme changed, someone neglected to uninvite you to the party. This theme of being invited and uninvited is a normal occurrence for Americans of African descent and will be repeated throughout our lives in various settings, but consistently throughout our lives. The next image is called Welcome. In American culture, the Statue of Liberty is viewed as this majestic symbol of freedom, inclusion, and liberty. But American history tells of a different story, one of injustice, systematic oppression, and rampant inequality. And if you look closely, the Jim Crow sign placed at the base of this historic monument is proof of such. Safe spaces. As a person of color, we often feel that we have very few places to call our own. And as a working mom and wife, I have found that oftentimes the only place I can give myself permission to breathe, vent, or even cry will be in the car or even in the shower. And it was remarkable that when I began researching for this very exhibition about a year ago, just how many people shared that they too have had to cultivate and nurture these random but essential spaces to release, these safe spaces. And over the past year, during the pandemic, and while experiencing a year filled with tremendous loss, unrest, and rampant social injustice, I found that persons of other backgrounds and ethnicities felt the need to create spaces as well. And the truth of the matter is that everyone deserves a space to release, to rest, and to be. Standing in Blood. This piece was inspired by my aunt. Every Sunday afternoon, our family gathers for a family call. And it has been such a blessing over the past year. It's our special way of connecting in a season when we're unable to, frankly, connect. So we share updates and announcements and prayers, and it's an opportunity for us to share that time together as a family. Family members join from all over the country, and we know that this time is sacred. It's also a time where we talk about civic matters and things of importance in the world. And on this particular call, my aunt was encouraging everyone to remember that when they go to vote, that they are standing in blood. She explained that Medgar Evers, who was slain in his very own driveway in front of his home, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, and countless other individuals of all backgrounds had lost their lives, not just in the fight for equality, but for us to have the right to vote, so that when you go to vote in every single election, it would behoove us to remember the tremendous sacrifice and sacrifices that have been made, and the tremendous responsibility that we have. Waiting room. This piece is important because at first glance, it looks just like a traditional maze. But if you look closely, I want you to consider two things. In the very center of the maze, you will see a Jim Crow sign that has been repurposed to designate that space as a colored waiting room. Now, if you know your history, colored waiting rooms were actually a thing. But this one is more symbolic. This is meant to represent the notion that oftentimes, as Americans of African descent, the very moment that we receive the opportunity, the promotion, or the chance to demonstrate that we are extraordinary beyond measure, there will oftentimes be a gentle or not so gentle reminder that some things have not changed. It could come in the form of you overhearing a conversation at the water cooler, or maybe you received an email that contained a racial slur or a discriminatory joke that was not necessarily meant for you to receive. If you look at the edges of the maze, you'll find that they simply reroute you right back to the waiting room, because we were simply, or correction, the system was not designed for us to get out. It was designed to keep us in the waiting room. The next image is called Sorry. You know, of all the stories that I collected over the past year, I will honestly say that this one was the most common. Regardless of the individual story, almost everyone had an experience where they arrived at a place of business. They were eager to support that place of business with their hard-earned money, and they were told that they were no longer seating, serving, or in many instances, that the place of business was closed. Now, oftentimes this was 15, 20, or even 30 minutes prior to closing time. And on rare occasions, this was in the middle of the day. For people of color, this is a very common experience, rooted in historic misinterpretation of values, and frankly, many people feel rooted in the notion that our contributions have no value, even when we attempt to support or purchase a service. Brown Battles. This piece of work was inspired by the Negro story of a gentleman who shared a different point of view as it relates to discrimination and racial harassment. He shared with me that the first time he experienced racism, bullying, and overall distress was not from another race or ethnicity. He actually shared that when he changed schools in his teen years, that for the next several years, he received disparate treatment from people in his own peer group. They criticized everything from his ambition and drive to his way of dress, his Afrocentric features, and his dark ebony skin. It was something that was very painful for him. So much so that even when he was recalling certain situations, he became emotional. It was as if these situations, these experiences, these encounters, these tauntings had happened yesterday. He is now a well-respected educator, coach, and community leader with a family of his own. But I thought that it was something that this man, who is in his 40s, was reduced to the age of 14 when recounting these stories. What followed after he shared his story was a conversation on social bias, personal experience, and the reality of the residue of slavery and systematic oppression and its ability to cultivate a painful seed of self-hatred in the lives of people of color. The next piece is called The Other Side. You know, for us, as Americans of African descent, one of our realities is that we often have to manage a series of unknowns. If you look at this image, you'll see an open door. Now, on the side closest to you, it may seem to be dimly lit, but it also has a sense of quiet warmth and protection. On the opposite side of the door, the light is shining brightly. It's the unknown, and there are wonderful possibilities for what can happen, but there also exists an opportunity for tragedy or for discrimination or to be the recipient of oppression. If you look above the door, you will see the Confederate flag, the last version of the American flag, actually, before Juneteenth. And if you look at all the images in this exhibition, the flag is a common theme, and it's meant to suggest that ideology, those beliefs that people of color are property and less than or not people of value, those things, not only do they currently exist, but they color our everyday walk in this country. I draped the flag on top of the door because I wanted to create a feeling of heaviness. I wanted to convey what it feels like, because every time that we leave outside of the door, we have no idea of what we're going to encounter. And every time my husband leaves for work, we pray as a family. We hold hands, we pray, and we share in that moment. Because the reality is, whether it be your spouse, partner, relative, or child, if they are a person of color, then you really don't know if they will ever make it home. About face. This piece was created in recognition of the systematic dehumanization of Americans of African descent. Whether it be on television, in print, or conveyed in the campaigns of major retailers and businesses, one thing has been consistent. As recently as last year, several major brands, organizations, and programs were cited for using images that were less than favorable in relation to people of color. Billions of dollars have been made by perpetuating this image of the black male as a criminal and the black female as loose and loud, and black children as ignorant and unworthy. And this could be no farther from the truth. Protect and serve. I created this piece in June of this summer, the summer of 2020, and it was created in recognition of the murder of George Floyd and in tribute to the 1,114 men, women, and children that had been killed due to police brutality. Now that figure is just for 2020. It does not take into account any loss of life prior to 2020, or that we've experienced, or will experience in 2021. For the longest time, I found it hard to name this piece because I could not find words to address such an atrocity. But it seemed appropriate to call it Protect and Serve, because while there are many men and women who serve as officers who are kind and God-fearing and upstanding, there are also many who seek to simply victimize, oppress, and lynch people of color. While that may sound like a radical statement, you need only look to the news for confirmation of such. Turning channels. Growing up, I often heard the elders in our community say, "The revolution will not be televised." In other words, the struggles and challenges of the working poor and communities of color have never fully been acknowledged in the mainstream media. Why? Because hearing such news isn't pleasant. It's uncomfortable. And it threatens the illusion of this idyllic American life that we've all been served. But in 2020, the pandemic forced us all inside. And thanks to smartphones, social media, and a few brave onlookers, mainstream America could no longer ignore the state of our union. Birthright. The "I am a man" sign dates back to civil rights movements and the Memphis sanitation strike of 1968 in particular. 52 years later, this historic symbol of equality is just as relevant. Americans of African descent are still underserved, underrepresented, disenfranchised, and victimized in the very country that was built from the free labor of their ancestors. Road trip. This piece was inspired by the illustrious pursuit of the elusive American dream. If you look closely, you will see one of those prized symbols of all things Americana. It's a beautiful red classic car. And if you look off into the horizon, you'll see the sky is the limit. You can do whatever you want to do, be whatever you want to be. But if you look below, you will see the American flag that supports the notion that reads clearly on the license plate that this beautiful dream, this lifestyle, this feeling, this campaign is an illusion, or at the very least, it is a reality for whites only. Headline. This piece is inspired by the news article printed by CBS News in September of 2020. And it reads, police in the U.S. killed a black man or woman every week in the U.S. in 2020. Trading spaces. What if this headline read, police in the U.S. killed a white man or woman every week in the U.S. in 2020? Now, as a woman of color, born, raised, and currently living in the United States of America, I submit to you that this headline would simply never be. It's not the reality of white Americans to fear for their very lives on a daily basis, nor is it the reality that there would ever be a headline like this pertaining to them. What if you had to live in fear of domestic terrorism, or worry on a daily basis that your mother, father, sister, brother, partner, spouse, son, or daughter could possibly lose their life at any given moment? What if you had a Negro story? And what if by hearing these stories and experiencing this exhibition today, you suddenly realized that the weight of racism could no longer be dismissed, minimized, or assigned to communities of color?